And welcome to Law Call on this Saturday evening. So glad that you are with us on WLOX and WDAM. I'm Ken Flanagan. Our topic tonight, a very timely one, workplace injuries. That's right. The phone lines are now open, 896-0713 or 1-800-349-0713. That toll-free number is good from Loosedale to Long Beach and all points in between. Our topic, so timely tonight, if you know someone who's been hurt at work, not by their fault or their fault, where does workman's comp come into play? Where does a lawsuit come into play? We've got the perfect guy for you tonight. Speaking of, there he is from the law firm of Reeves and Medier, our friend and your friend on Saturday night, Jim Reeves. You've been doing workplace injuries a long time, haven't you, Jim?
Whole career, 30 plus years now. So seen a lot of them, seen them in all kinds of instances. And, you know, the thing about workplace injuries, especially here in Mississippi, we have a lot of people who have blue-collar jobs. They're frequent. You have more of them than you should, more of them than you like to see. And especially in heavy industries, quite often they're serious or deadly. And so they're very, very serious. And if you are involved in one of these, the technicalities in terms of what they're supposed to do, your employer, what their benefits are supposed to be, can be drastically different depending on what the circumstances are and who you have representing you.
Absolutely. And who represents you is definitely a big thing, for sure. Before we get to the phone lines, though, the phone lines are open, 896-0713 or 1-800-349-0713. We appreciate y'all staying up late with us, for sure. The hockey game went just a little bit late. We appreciate you staying with us on this Saturday night. Look, it's cold. It's windy out there. You don't want to be, don't go anywhere else. Just stay with us the rest of the night. We'll put you to bed safe and sound here on Law Call. All right, Jim, email question came in this week. It was perfect for you and for the show. We pulled it aside. It came in from Kelly, and it says tonight, my brother was seriously hurt at work because of a safety issue that was ignored by the company. If he gets workers' compensation, does that mean he has no other legal recourse against his employer? Great question.
Absolutely not. Okay. And so just sort of lay out the general the layout of what happens if you're injured on the job and what your potential rights may be. So first of all, if you're injured on the job, even if it's no one's fault, you're entitled to workers' compensation benefits, which means basically from your employer, you're entitled to receive 2/3 of your average weekly wage, all of the medical expenses that are related to your injury for life, and maybe some type of lump sum disability on the back end if you end up being what's called permanently and totally disabled. Okay, that's the generally the way that works. You have other avenues over recovery in an industrial setting, especially. One, you can sue an employer directly if they have acted in a willful, wanton way that has injured someone. So if it's something above basic negligence or gross negligence, you can still sue them and get complete recovery for all of your wages that are lost in the past and the future, all your medical expenses past and future, pain and suffering, and everything else that's involved.
Okay.
A lot of times in these cases, too, you have perhaps a product that's defective. So, for instance, if someone's working on a machine that didn't have a proper guard, that didn't have a proper kill switch to turn it off, a safety mechanism applied, you may have a claim against the manufacturer or supplier of that particular piece of equipment as well. And another sort of wrinkle you have to really look at is sometimes if you're injured because of the negligence of another contractor's employee, you may be able to have a recovery against them as well. So it can get complicated very quickly, but you need someone who's experienced in these kinds of cases because there are lots of avenues to look at, to explore, to make sure that you're being fully compensated if you're unfortunate enough to be involved in one of these.
And Jim, I guess I'll say it, there's so many great attorneys out there that do family law and criminal law, but when you're talking about this type of law, for lawsuits and following up with subcontractors, you need a personal injury attorney.
It can be very technical. It can be very overwhelming to attorneys, even attorneys who practice a long time who haven't done this kind of work.
Right.
The law is very complicated, it's very nuanced, in how you are represented, how you present that case can make all the difference between a significant recovery or a very limited recovery.
And we try here on Law Call to be timely. We try to be up on the issues.
Right.
Well, the reality is tonight we are very timely on this one. Jim Reeves and his partner, one of his co-counsels out of Hattiesburg, y'all are pursuing a massive workplace lawsuit right now that really could affect labor laws across the Southeast.
It is, and it's a tragic, tragic case. It's It's been featured in the New York Times, in Miami Herald, other newspapers throughout the country. It's featured actually in an NBC documentary called The Slaughterhouse Children. And the case involves an underage worker at one of the slaughterhouses owned by a company called Marjack in Hattiesburg. And the underage worker who was working in the plant in violation of OSHA industry standards and was cleaning a machine. And basically, Marjack had this happen with other workers before, at least once in the last couple of years, where they're working around a machine that's not properly turned off,
right?
No proper safety mechanisms were in place, and the young man was pulled into the machine and killed in a very horrific way.
And Jim, I mean, we're talking a teenager here.
A teenager.
I mean, it is. I mean, this is not a.
We are.
This wasn't a young man. This was a teenager that really had no business being in that piece of machinery.
No business being on that plant. Okay, much less around that machinery.
Right.
And no worker, regardless of age, is supposed to be working around this dangerous machinery. There are specific OSHA regulations. And let's talk about those a little bit because OSHA mandates in most of these workplaces safety regulations that employers have to follow or are supposed to follow, or they can face stiff penalties or fines. And one of the most common areas where we see accidents in manufacturing is failure to follow what's called lockout tagout. OSHA requires if someone's going to be working around an exposed machinery that the machine be locked out, meaning the power source is turned off and it's locked off where no one can turn it back on inadvertently or otherwise while a worker's in what's called the zone of danger.
Right.
Okay? And if that's violated, and OSHA cited this company in this case over $200,000 for violating lockout tagout in this case and causing this young man's death, and had cited them before for something similar. And so it's a real problem. These basic safety mechanisms would have prevented this injury, this death, and others. And it's very important that those are followed. There are specific training requirements that you follow those. That's one of the things we see. Some of the worst injuries, deaths, quite often in these cases when lockout, tagout procedures are not followed. You can imagine these big machines. There's basically cogs and machineries that can pull you in and basically chew you up. And so it's tragic and it's so unnecessary.
Jim he is leading the edge on this. Yes, Wall Street Journal, Miami Herald, and the George County Times and Hattiesburg American.
Right.
I mean, we got you covered on this story, and WLOX, of course, on that one.
Right.
I suspect we'll talk about throughout the LawCall season. Here's our email question for you. I think you're going to like this one. It comes from Johnny. Johnny says, can I recover damages from an injury on my job if I was partly to blame? My supervisor says no. Well, what do you say, Jim?
I would expect the supervisor to say no, and I would expect the supervisor to probably put part of the blame on Johnny or maybe all the blame, okay?
Right.
Unfortunately, the supervisor's wrong, okay? Workers' compensation benefits are payable regardless of fault. It means if it's your fault, the supervisor's fault, the company's fault, doesn't matter, they have to pay your workers' compensation benefits at a minimum, okay? And if you have a claim against somebody else, like we talked about earlier, say a product manufacturer or a contractor has hurt you, is not protected by the workers' compensation statute, then we have in Mississippi what's recognized as comparative negligence, which means the jury assesses who's at fault, not the supervisor. A jury gets to decide whether you're 10% at fault or 50% at fault or 60% at fault, or if it's all your fault, then you don't have a recovery, okay? But a jury makes that determination, and so quite often juries assess fault against people that bring claims, and then the defendant has to pay the amount of fault assessed against them.
I see.
Okay?
Gotcha. All right, so Johnny, I would pursue this regardless of what
you're clearly, at a minimum, you're entitled to your workers' compensation benefits.
And then
maybe more.
Right.
But in the end, the supervisor doesn't decide. It'd be nice if the world worked that way, I guess.
Sure.
You get to decide, I don't know anything, but he doesn't get to decide that, okay?
All right, we're going to head to Perk now and talk to Anita. Anita, good evening. Thank you for holding on for us. What can we help you with tonight?
Okay, we were hit head-on by a Stone County squad car driven by the chaplain. He went through a stop sign at high speed and no lights, no sirens. And they're saying that they're not responsible due to a tort law.
Miss Anita, I think I got you. So you were involved with a public vehicle in Stone County, and then they're telling you you don't have a lawsuit or don't have any ways to move forward with it.
Okay.
What do you think,
Correct.
Jim?
As in Johnny's call earlier, they're wrong. Okay, so you do, and I'm laughing about this. A head-on collision sounds serious. I hope
You're right.
No one is too seriously injured, but those are terrifying. But no, that's not true. What is true is that against most government entities, including the county sheriffs and police officers, there's for these kinds of things, there's a limited waiver of immunity, which means you can recover against them, but you're capped in the amount that you can recover. It's by a certain amount for a lawsuit that you're capped at per a statute, or the extent of their insurance coverage is the way that generally works.
Okay.
One thing to be aware of, though, in these kinds of cases, you have a very short statute of limitations, very short time period when you can bring one of these claims. And before you bring one, there has to be a letter sent, and it has to be a detailed letter done just the right way pursuant to a statute to put them on notice of the claim. So if this happened, and I'm not sure I caught the date.
I don't think so either.
But you can't sit around on this. If you want to call us Monday morning, we'll take a talk to you right away about this, but you can't sit around. You have no more than a year probably to bring this claim from the date after it happened, okay?
Anita, are you still with us? Anita, do you know when? Do you remember the date of when your accident was?
Yes, it's past a year. It was in 22 of December 3rd.
You probably got a problem. I'll still talk to you about it and look at it if you like, but generally it's going to be a year absent some kind of extenuating circumstances. I'm sorry to hear that because a lot of people get confused because the general statute in Mississippi is 3 years, but as against a government entity, 1 year.
Jim, you have delivered nothing but bad news tonight.
I mean, have.
All of our Melinda and Anita here.
Well, I thought it was good news because it was going to be, the sheriff said they weren't at fault. It couldn't be, but they are. But now
Anita, call Jim on Monday for sure. Let him double check everything. As you can see on the screen, Jim has set aside 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. on Mondays for LawCall calls. Double check everything with him on that one for sure. But the time frame, it is pretty tight on that one.
Yeah, so, it sounds questionable, but I'll be glad to look at it for you and see if there's something that can be done.
Where does the time go, Jim? It is, speaking of time frames, we're all out of time. Thank you so much for joining us late on the show tonight. We'll be back next Saturday to talk more about personal injury and the law. But until then, good night.